Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, a high school couple, now married, joined the army for a stable future. During deployment, the husband learns of his wife's affair through a townsperson's revelation and Facebook messages. He exposes the infidelity online, leading to divorce. Despite initial trust issues, he finds love again and remarries, now happily settled with 3 children. Now let's get into the story. Me, 43 male, wife 42 female, and I both got married a couple of years after high school. We knew each other while we were in school, but we didn't start dating until after we both graduated. We ended up working at the same small-town grocery store and really clicking. We were polar opposites, but it seemed like we could learn a lot from each other, so everything worked out. I didn't grow up in a family with money or anything like that, so one of the options I had to move forward in my life was to join the army. It would have offered me stable pay, college would have been more attainable, and I felt a sense of pride in fighting for my country. I had a long discussion with my wife about what to do, so we both ended up deciding that joining the army was going to be a good option. I signed up at a local recruitment office and underwent all of the physical exams, training, etc. Eventually, I was accepted, and not long after I was deployed to Iraq. Now, I don't want to get into a lot of the stuff that happened while I was there, but it was extremely difficult. I didn't have a lot of time to relax or even call home and talk to my wife. I missed her more than anything, but I had a few grainy pictures on the extremely out-of-date cell phone of the time. After some time, I was able to go back home and be with her. It was a homecoming like something you would see in a movie. She was waiting for me, and she ran right into my arms, and she cried into my chest while I held her. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. Unfortunately, that happiness was short-lived. We lived in a very small town, so whenever I would go to the gas station, a restaurant, the grocery store, you name it, people would come up to me and pat me on the back and thank me for my service. I really felt like a hero in town. One night, I was meeting up at the local dive bar with a couple of friends from high school who were back in town. We were catching up and enjoying our conversation, shooting some pool, and not paying much attention to the people around us. Now, most of the time I was out, I'd be with my wife. It almost felt like the time apart made her want to be with me all the time. I didn't mind it, but I was happy to be able to spend some time just with my boys. While we were in the middle of a game of pool, someone from the bar came and tapped me on the shoulder. Was expecting the usual "I just wanted to thank you" that I commonly received, but I was wrong. He was an older gentleman I recognized from around town, though I didn't know much about him. He pulled me outside and told me he had something to tell me. I was curious, so I followed him out, where he confessed to knowing about an affair my wife had while I was deployed. I was shocked and didn't necessarily believe him right away. I thought he was kind of crazy. My wife loved me. There was no way she'd cheat on me, but he gave a lot of specific details that made me see a glimmer of truth in his words. He told me that there was another man, often at my house, and hanging around my wife at the bar. On one occasion, he saw them kissing in her car, which led to them getting very handsy, and he implied that she performed oral romance on him. As much as I didn't want to believe it, I couldn't ignore it. He described the man, but he didn't know his name. I ended up leaving the bar early and going home. My wife was asleep when I got there, so I started digging around. Facebook had become very popular over the years, and my wife was obsessed with it. So much that it actually caused some issues with us. I didn't have an account, so I didn't know how it worked. I turned on our computer, and I was relieved when I went to the website and saw that she was logged into her page. I started to question what I was doing there. It felt like a huge invasion of privacy to be snooping through her stuff, but I convinced myself that it was harmless if she was doing nothing wrong. It took me a few minutes to get the hang of how the website worked. Then when I got it down, I was able to look through some of her posts and see who was liking them. Most of them were her relatives and friends, some strangers that I could see she knew solely through Facebook and not in person. However, she posted a picture of herself, and in the comments, there were a lot of men I didn't know telling her she was beautiful. One of them happened to be an account with a profile picture that looked a lot like the man in the bar described. I found the chat part of the website and looked through some of her messages. There had been dozens of men messaging her, telling her that they wanted to be with her, sending explicit messages about what they wanted to do with her, and sending pictures. She was entertaining all of them. She was sexting with these strange men, sending them pictures of herself back, and telling them exactly what they wanted to hear. The man in question that I was looking for originally was one of those men, but I could see that their messages were different than all of the others. He was sending her pictures of himself, and she was commenting about how good-looking he was. Apparently, he only lived a town over, so they made plans to get together to hook up. She had given him our address, and they set several dates to be together. Every time they would part ways the following day, they would send messages talking about how much fun they had together and how they couldn't wait to be with each other again. On top of that, he was telling her about how much fun they had together. Much better she was than his wife. The messages he was sending her were appalling. I thought I knew my wife, but I was mistaken. Not only was she betraying my trust, but she was knowingly sleeping with another married man. I felt like I was falling through the air when I read those messages. My entire life had just been ripped out from under my feet. I pulled out my phone and I actually took pictures and videos of some of the messages because I didn't know of any other way to do it. Because we were in such a small town, everybody always knew everybody else's business. Just from the amount of time I was scanning my wife's Facebook page, I saw that she was posting things about being a military wife. There were dozens of people commenting that she was so strong for what she did and how they sympathized with her. I was going to ruin all of that. I was going to tell them all the truth, and she would lose everything. I made my own Facebook page, posting a picture of myself so everybody would know that it was me. I must have sent out 200 friend requests in the span of a few hours. I friended the man she was sleeping with and his wife. Both of them accepted my request. I waited a little while so I could make sure I had as many friends as possible before posting my evidence. After a couple of days, I felt good enough to do it. I made a big long post about how when I was away the only thing I wanted was my wife, but while I was away, she was involved with countless men. I posted screenshots of some of the messages and talked about how betrayed I felt. I made sure to include her face and that of the man that I knew she slept with. The post got hundreds and hundreds of likes. It was being shared with people that I didn't even know. Soon enough, people were commenting on her posts and telling her that she should be ashamed of herself and that she was disgusting for what she did. The man that she was sleeping with messaged me and told me that I was a coward for handling things the way that I did, but I just ignored him. I messaged his wife to make sure she was okay. I didn't know her, but we had gone through the same thing, and I wanted her to know that she could reach out to me if she needed to. Told me that she kicked him out of the house and she was going to be filing for divorce. I was doing the exact same thing. I ended up divorcing my wife. We were only renting at the time, so I moved out and into a house with one of my buddies from high school. I'm not going to lie, it took a while for me to recover from the betrayal that I felt, but after a few years, I met a lovely woman who I had a lot in common with, and we fell in love with each other. She was very patient with me and understood why I was nervous about her potentially cheating, but she did everything in her power to reassure me of our relationship. Now we have been married for 10 years, and we have 3 wonderful children together. Today's second story. In this story, a couple, married for 14 years, survived a fire but faced marital turmoil. The wife grew close to her doctor during recovery, leading to infidelity. The husband discovered them together, leading to a violent confrontation. Despite attempts to get justice, legal action failed. The wife moved in with the doctor, but he soon dumped her. She regrets her actions but faces consequences. Now let's get into the story. My wife, 42 female, and I, 48 male, were married for 14 years. We never had any children, but that's not to say we didn't try. She was a manager at Kmart, and I worked in a shipping warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but but it felt like we belonged with each other and our work crew. We had a routine and friends like family that I wouldn't have traded for the world. We were always honest, talkative, attentive, and considerate of each other. Our sense of humor was pretty dark. We liked watching and reading things online that would make other people squeamish. We also thought it was super funny when we ripped on each other, and our friends thought we were seriously fighting. People from our apartment building would take turns cooking on the grill for the rest of us for a giant cookout. One day, the grill was moved to a different spot and caught a tree on fire. It spread to the roof of the building and down, all in a matter of minutes. Thankfully, everyone survived, but my wife and I passed out and had to be rescued by a volunteer firefighter before the fire trucks even arrived. We were taken to the hospital for asphyxiation from smoke inhalation. I was discharged 2 weeks before my wife because she wasn't able to cover her mouth and nose like I did while I searched for her. It's impossible to see and smoke like that, so I started choking before I found her. While my wife recovered, she was conscious, but she needed special attention and respiratory treatment. I noticed one doctor that seemed to care very deeply about my wife. He was handsome and charming, which irritated me. My wife smiled at him, and they looked into each other's eyes very intently when they mostly him spoke. When I started staying by my wife's side, the doctor told me he was the one to receive her that day in the ER, and he'd been looking after her ever since. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted my wife to get the care she needed, but I didn't like this guy. He seemed to think too highly of himself and think he could take my wife if he wanted to. When he helped her stand up, he put his arm around her waist and held her close. She took her time moving when he was like that. I was struggling with my thoughts at this point. He didn't really need help walking, did she? My wife could barely speak, but she seemed smitten with the doctor and emotionally strained when she looked at me. She never said anything really alarming, but it was clear something had changed. We had a near-death experience, and that does change people. But I didn't want to believe my wife, and I wouldn't make it through this together unchanged. When it was time for her to be discharged, she hesitated to go home. She asked if she could stay in the hospital longer, which gave the doctor the opportunity to offer her follow-up visits at her home. I was very suspicious and didn't think it was all in my head anymore. I thought about objecting but decided not to. I imagined how bad and weird it would look for me to deny my wife doctor visits. Even if he was pushing boundaries, I'd look like the bad guy. I couldn't believe he so easily agreed to make house visits. This was something a person with much less qualifications could have done. So I was positive it was because he at least wanted to visit my wife, if not more. The very first doctor visit was at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Of course, I was at work. I texted my wife at 9:10 to ask if he was there and how it was going. She didn't reply, so I started to wonder what was going on. I felt like a shell of a person walking around the warehouse. 2 hours later, I still heard nothing from her. Coworkers approached me, concerned for my well-being because I was pale and clammy. At 11:25, I was pulling into her driveway. I drove recklessly to get there as fast as I could after I got permission from my boss. I noticed his luxury vehicle and that the front door was locked, which was unusual for when we had a visitor. As I walked up the stairs, I heard them. Our dresser was pinning the bedroom door open against the wall because privacy was never a concern of ours. When I got there, I just dropped my knees. I had no control over my body. The doctor leaped up and scrambled to get his pants on, flushed and angry. My wife covered herself with blankets, yelling helplessly as I rose to my feet and started throwing punches. It was the loudest I heard her since before the fire, and it made my blood run cold. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. Something made her change and let this man screw up her emotions. After I got in a few punches in my adrenalized state, the doctor must have realized what a dire and unprofessional situation he was in because he stumbled down the stairs, got to his car, and drove off. In the bedroom, my wife apologized profusely and pleaded for me to forgive her, but I just screamed no and called her names that accurately described what she did. Of course, when I said cheater, she tried to say I stopped them so it didn't count. You failed to understand that trying to seduce him with her eyes and gestures in the hospital and making out with him in the nude still counted as cheating. At first I was worried he was going to press charges against me, and it would be my word against his, but nothing happened for months. I tried to get the doctor fired, but it didn't work because nothing was captured on camera, and he hadn't told anyone he was making a house call. Plus, he had expensive lawyers that would have pinned all the blame on me for causing him injuries. My wife left pitiful voicemails on my phone, but when she realized I couldn't stand to look at her, she continued seeing the doctor even before our divorce was final. I ended up kicking her out of the house, and a week later, she posted that she was in a relationship with him. It made me sick. Life really seemed cruel, unfair, and without reason at this point. Thankfully, that's when it all started to turn around. She moved in with the doctor, who wasn't gonna hand her money to help with the divorce aftermath. It didn't take long before AP realized what a mess she was and dumped her, kicking her to the curb when she had nothing else. She was so defeated, she didn't even try to get me to let her back in. Her sister let her move in since she was exceptionally depressed after screwing up her whole life with me. My ex calls me occasionally, saying she misses me and would give anything in the world to have another chance at being my wife. She sort of blames the fire at our apartment for screwing up her head and making her think she felt things for the doctor when it was just survivor thankfulness. I didn't believe a word she said. For all I knew, she wouldn't be saying any of that to me if it weren't for AP leaving her.